The sun was a burning white coin in the sky, baking the red earth of the savannah. In the village of the Mavesi, the air buzzed with the sounds of life women laughing by the river, the thump-thump of grain being pounded, children chasing a ragged ball made of woven grass. But on the edge of it all, a boy named Kiddo sat alone, watching. He was 14, with eyes that seemed to hold the quiet of the long, empty plains. His small hut, patched with old hides, stood apart from the neat circle of family homes. His parents had been taken by a sickness 3 rains ago, and since then he lived in the spaces between families, earning scraps of food by helping with the goats or fetching water. The other children didn't mean to be cruel, but they had their own circles, their own games. Quito was like a ghost, seen but not truly noticed, except by one person, Nalangu. Nalangu was the tribe's storykeeper, an elder so old his skin looked like cracked leather pulled over bone. He walked with a stick carved from ebony, and his eyes, clouded with age, still seemed to see everything. While others saw a scrawny orphan, Nalangu saw a boy who was quiet, who watched the birds and noticed when the rains were late. Sometimes Nalangu would gesture with his stick, and Kaido would come sit in the shade outside the elder's special hut. Nalangu wouldn't speak much, but his silence was a kind of company that Quito never got anywhere else. It was a peace. Today was different. Today was the Feast of First Rains, a big ceremony to thank the ancestors in the earth. The whole village was gathered in the wide, dusty clearing at the center of the homes. Drums beat a deep, hungry rhythm. Dancers, dressed in brilliant feathers and beads, swirled and stamped, their movements telling stories of the hunt and the harvest. The smell of roasting meat filled the air, making Kyo's stomach ache. He hung back near the termite mound at the clearing's edge, a familiar observer. Nalangu sat on a special stool in a place of honor, dressed in heavy, ceremonial robes made of spotted animal skins. He looked even more fragile than usual, a small, still figure in the middle of all the noise and movement. His job was to sit and hold the spirit of the ancestors in the ceremony. Quito watched him, thinking the old man must be tired. Then a change came over the animals. The village dogs, who had been lying in the dust, suddenly pricked their ears and whined. The goats in their pen on the far side started bleating nervously, pushing against the wooden fence. A strange tension crept into the air, cutting through the drumbeats. The dancers slowed, confused. From beyond the river, a low rumble began. It wasn't thunder. It was deeper, heavier. A solid sound that vibrated up through the ground into the soles of Quito's bare feet. Someone shouted, a high, sharp sound of pure terror. Over the rise, a dark tide appeared. 10 Cape buffalo, massive bulls with horns like wicked, curved spears, were running. But this wasn't a normal run. This was a blind, panicked stampede. Their eyes were wide and white with fear, maybe from a lion attack, maybe from a strange noise. They were a wall of muscle and rage, heading straight for the heart of the village, straight for the clearing full of people. Chaos exploded. The drums stopped. Screams ripped the air. People scattered like startled birds, running for their huts, for the trees, for anywhere. The dancers' beautiful feathers were trampled into the dust. In the frantic scramble, Nalangu was forgotten. The old man tried to stand, but his robes were heavy, his legs weak. His stool tipped over. He was stranded, a tiny island in the path of a thundering, deadly river. Ki2 saw it all happen in frozen snapshots. The terror on the elder's face. The rolling cloud of dust behind the buffalo. The wide, pounding hooves that could crush bone to powder. Everyone was running away. No one was running toward him. A feeling hotter than the sun flashed through Quito. It wasn't bravery. It wasn't even a thought. It was a pure, simple reaction. Nalangu was the only person who had ever given him a place, even if it was just a quiet spot in the shade. He couldn't let that be erased. While others fled sideways, Quito ran forward. He didn't feel his legs move. The world narrowed to a tunnel. The old man on the ground, the beasts getting closer, the gap between them. The sound was deafening now, a quaking roar of hooves and hot animal breath. He reached Nalangu just as the first buffalo were upon them. There was no time for words, no time to pull him up. Quito did the only thing he could. He threw his own thin body over the elders, wrapping his arms around the spotted robes, trying to make himself a shield. He turned his face away and squeezed his eyes shut. The first impact was like being hit by a falling tree. A searing pain exploded in his side. Then came the storm. A hoof caught his leg with a sickening crack. Another slammed into his back. The world became a nightmare of dust and agony, of being shaken and crushed into the hard earth. He felt weight, immense weight, over and over. He heard a sound he didn't know was his own voice, a choked cry, and then he heard nothing at all. The last thing he knew was the smell of dry earth, and the rough feel of Nalangu's robe against his cheek, before a final. Dark hoof blotted out the sun, and everything went silent. The world came back in pieces. First, it was smell. Not the sharp, clean smell of the healer's hut with its herbs and ashes, but something older. It was the scent of dry clay, of smoke from a single, small fire, and a faint, sweet smell like honey mixed with dry grass. Then came sound, the crackle of that fire, the soft, rhythmic scraping of stone against wood, and a low, humming sound, so deep it was more a vibration in his bones than a noise in his ears. Pain arrived last, and it came all at once. It was a fire that lived inside his skin. His right side was a solid wall of agony. His leg throbbed with a hot, sickening pulse. Every breath felt like a knife was poking his ribs. A small, hurt sound escaped his lips. The scraping stopped. A shadow fell over him. Quito forced his eyes open, his vision blurry and swimming. He saw the weathered, concerned face of the elder, Nalangu, looking down at him. He was in Nalangu's own hut, a place no one else ever entered. The walls were lined with strange things, carved gourds, bundles of unusual feathers, pots sealed with wax. "Do not try to move, young one." Nalangu's voice was a dry whisper, but it was calm. "The bones are still remembering their shape." Quito tried to speak, but only a dry croak came out. Nalangu brought a gourd cup to his lips. The water was cool and had a strange, earthy taste, like roots and bark. He drank a little, and the world became a bit clearer, and with it, a flood of confusion. He should be dead. He remembered the hooves, the weight, the sound of his own bones. He remembered the darkness swallowing him. He looked down under a light covering of antelope skin. His body was a map of purple and black bruises, angry and dark. His leg was stiff, wrapped in wide strips of bark and tightly bound with vine. But he was alive. He could feel his toes. He could breathe, even if it hurt. The buffalo, Quito managed to whisper. "Gone," Nalangu said, settling onto a low stool beside him. "The storm passed. You took its fury, but—" Quito's mind, fuzzy with pain, tried to understand. "How am I here?" Nalangu didn't answer right away. He picked up his stone and a piece of wood he had been carving and went back to his slow, careful scraping. A body is stronger than we think. A spirit even more so. That wasn't an answer. It was the kind of thing elders said at storytelling time. But Quito was too tired, too full of hurt, to ask more. He let his head fall back and slipped into an uneasy sleep, filled with dreams of thundering shadows. The next time he woke, it was dark. The single fire cast dancing shadows on the walls. Nalanu was asleep on a mat across the hut. Keto lay there, listening to the old man's slow breathing and the sounds of the night insects outside. The pain was a constant, dull roar. He saw something then. A large clay pot near the fire, with a leafy plant growing in it. The plant looked half dead, its leaves brown and curled at the edges. Nalanu must have gotten up in his sleep. He moved slowly to the pot, his hand trembling slightly. He placed his palm over the wilted plant and closed his eyes. He stayed like that for a long moment, humming that same low, deep hum. He poured a little of his special water from the gourd at its base out in the firelight. Keto thought he saw the brown leaves twitch. Just a little. He blinked, sure the pain was making him see things. When he looked again, the plant seemed. No, it was a little greener. The edges of the leaves looked less like dust. It was impossible. He closed his eyes, telling himself it was the dream. Days passed. They blurred together in a haze of sleep, sips of the strange-tasting water in the quiet company of the old man. Nalangju changed his bandages, and Keto saw the wounds. Deep, ugly gashes that should have been open and weeping were instead closed with thick, dark scabs. The swelling in his leg was going down too fast. He had seen injuries before. They did not heal like this dot one afternoon. A fever took him. It burned through his body, making him shake and his mind swim with wild pictures. He saw the buffalo running in slow motion. He saw Nalanu's face, not old and wrinkled, but smooth and strong. He saw roots digging deep into the earth, like veins. In his fever state, he watched Nalangu prepare more medicine. The elder had a small, old knife. His hand slipped, and the sharp edge cut a deep line across his own palm. Keto gasped, but the sound was lost in his dry throat. Nalangu looked at the cut, not with alarm, but with a kind of tired sadness. He held his hand over a clean bowl, letting a few drops of blood fall. Then he closed his fist around the wound, his knuckles white. He sat very still, his eyes closed, that deep hum filling the hut. A minute passed. Then he slowly opened his hand. He dipped it in a bowl of water, washing it clean. He held it up to the light, coming through the hut's small opening. The cut was gone, not bandaged, not scabbed. Gone. Only a thin, pink line remained, and as Keto stared, even that seemed to fade into the old man's skin, until there was nothing but the familiar web of wrinkles. The fever broke then, leaving Keto cold and shivering. But his mind was terribly, clearly awake. He looked at Nalangu, who was now watching him back, knowing he had been seen. The elder's secret was no longer a quiet mystery. It was a real, impossible thing sitting in the room with them. Keto wasn't just alive by luck. He was alive because of something he could not understand. The old man was not just a keeper of stories. He was hiding a power in his old, fragile hands, a power that could mend flesh and maybe, just maybe, bring a boy back from the very edge of death. And that power, Keto understood with a chill, was a burden. The silence in the hut was heavy after that. Nalangu didn't speak. He just tended the small fire, his movements slow and careful, as if every bit of his energy was precious. Keto watched him, his mind racing over what he had seen. The healed cut, the plant that seemed to wake up, his own body, which felt broken, but was somehow stitching itself back together far too quickly. The fear of the stampede was gone, replaced by a new, deeper kind of awe. Finally, when the evening sun threw long, orange fingers of light into the hut, Nalangu spoke. His voice was not the storytelling voice of the village circle. It was quieter, older, like the wind over rocks. "You have seen the shadow of the truth," he said, not looking at Keto. "And because you took the blow meant for me, you have stepped into its light. Now you must understand the weight of it." He motioned for Quito to sit up, helping him lean against the clay wall. The pain was still there, a constant ache, but it was a dull thing now, not the sharp terror of before. Nalangu reached for a small, ordinary-looking pouch made of worn leather that hung around his neck. He didn't open it. He just held it in his palm, as if feeling its warmth. "This holds the last piece of the seed of the first baobab," he began. "It is not a seed you can plant in the earth. It is a piece of the first life, a spark from when the world was green and new." He explained that it had been passed down, not from father to son, but from guardian to guardian, for more generations than stories could remember. The one who carried it could feel the heartbeat of the land. They could encourage life, help a struggling shoot find the sun, or soothe the pain of a creature. They healed, but in a way that borrowed from the great, deep well of life around them. "But it is a vow, not a gift," Nalangu said, and his eyes were full of a deep, old sadness. "A guardian must live apart. They cannot use the seed to change fate, to make a man rich, or to win a fight. They are a keeper of balance. They watch. They feel. They mend small breaks. But they must never stop a great fall, for that unravels the great pattern." He looked directly at Quito then, and the boy saw the true cost. "Using it as I did, to pull a life back from the other side of the veil, it is a violence against the pattern. It shortens the guardian's own thread of life. Every deep healing takes a piece of the one who gives it." Quito understood. The elder's frailty, his slow movements, it wasn't just age. It was the price for saving him. Guilt, thick and hot, washed over him. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his throat tight. "I didn't know." Nalangu held up a hand. "You acted from a pure heart. A heart without a thought for itself. That is why the secret even allowed it. That is why you are here. A selfish heart would have died on the plain." He sighed, a sound like dry leaves. "But the balance has been upset. The land feels it." He told Quito to listen, not with his ears, but with the new, quiet feeling inside him since he woke up. Quito closed his eyes. He heard the fire crackle, an insect chirp, but underneath it, he felt something else. A faint trembling in the earth, a feeling of wrongness, like a sour note in a familiar song. "The life that was poured into you was meant for the land," Nalangu said. "Now a sickness is waking, a blight. It starts at the edges." The next morning, Nalangu left the hut for a short while. When he returned, his face was graver than ever. In his hand was a stalk of the tall, sweet grass that grew near the river. Its end was black and shriveled, not from fire, but from a creeping dryness that seemed to suck the life right out of it. It smelled of dust and emptiness. "It is spreading," was all he said. That night, the feeling of wrongness grew stronger. The air outside, usually full of the comfortable sounds of night, became too quiet. Then Quito heard it, a sound that made the hair on his arms stand up. It was a whisper, but not from a person. It was like the sound of dry reeds rubbing together, or of many insects chittering with a hollow voice. It came from just beyond the wall of the hut. There were no words, but the feeling was clear. A hungry curiosity. Nalangu's head snapped up. For the first time, Quito saw real fear on the old man's face. The elder moved quickly to the entrance, not opening it, but placing his hand flat against the hide door. He began his low hum, deeper and stronger than before. A warmth seemed to pulse from him, pushing against the walls of the hut. Quito felt it as a wave of calm, like the shade of the great baobab tree. Outside, the whispering stopped. A sense of something slinking away, disappointed, lingered in the air. Nalangu slumped, breathing heavily, his energy spent. "It feels the weakness," he said, his voice ragged. "It is drawn to the imbalance. to the life that was taken from the soil and given to you. Keto lay in the dark, his heart pounding. The secret was no longer just a wonder. It was a danger. He had wanted to save a life, and in doing so, he had broken a sacred rule. Now the very land was getting sick, and something that lurked in the shadows was coming closer. Drawn by the scent of a broken promise, he looked at the old man, who was just a shape in the darkness, exhausted and frail. The orphan boy, who had never been responsible for anything more than a few goats, now carried a terrible weight. His survival had a cost, and the bill was coming due. The days that followed were filled with a quiet, growing dread. Keto's body continued to mend with that impossible speed. He could sit up without gasping. He could put a little weight on his injured leg, feeling the bone that had been cracked now solid and strong beneath the skin. But with every step towards health, he saw Nalangu take a step towards weakness. The elder moved slower. His hands trembled more. The deep, lively light in his eyes seemed to be fading, like a fire slowly running out of wood. One afternoon, Nalangu sent Keto to fetch water from the sacred spring, a small, clear pool, a short walk into the bush. It was the first time Keto had left the hut since the stampede. The world outside felt different. The air was still and too hot. The usual chorus of birds was thin and scattered. As he walked, he saw it. Patches of earth where the grass wasn't just dry from the sun, but dead, blackened, and brittle, crumbling to dust at a touch. It spread out from certain spots like a stain, and at its edges, the healthy grass looked sickly and pale. The blight. It was real, and it was here, close to the village. When he returned, the village was in an uproar. A group of herders had returned early, their faces dark with worry. Their goats were thin, refusing to graze on the pastures near the river, which were now touched by the same creeping wither. People stood in anxious clusters, their voices loud and sharp. "The land is angry," one man shouted. "The rains are late, and now this poison comes from the soil." Then a woman pointed a sharp finger directly at Keto as he limped past with the water gourd. "It started after he came back. No one survives the hooves of 10 buffalo. It is not natural. He has brought a shadow with him." Keto hurried his steps, his face burning, his heart sinking. He felt their eyes on his back, suspicious and fearful. He was no longer just an orphan. He was a bad omen. Inside the hut, Nalangu listened to the rising noise from the village. He nodded slowly, as if he had expected this. "They are scared," he said. "When people are scared, they look for a reason, for someone to blame. It is easier than facing a truth they do not understand." "But it's my fault," Keto said, the guilt like a stone in his stomach. "They're right. It is the choice's fault," Nalangu corrected gently. "My choice to break the vow. But now we must make a new choice, the only one that can set the balance right." That night, Nalangu laid it bare. The air inside the hut was thick with the smell of herbs and the weight of his words. "The seed is failing in my hands," the elder said, his voice a dry rustle. "I am too old, and the act of saving you used the last of my strength as a guardian. The blight will spread. That whispering thing in the dark will grow bolder. It feeds on this sickness, on this broken balance." He reached out and took Keto's hand. His grip was surprisingly strong. The seed must have a new guardian, a strong young heart to carry it. The land must feel life flowing strongly again, through a vessel that is not worn out. Keto's breath caught. He understood what was being asked. "Me?" "The seed chooses in its own way," Nalangu said. "It chose to let you live. It responds to your heart, the heart that threw itself in front of the storm for an old man. But you must choose it back. It cannot be taken. It must be given, and it must be received with a full and willing spirit." Quito stared into the fire. His whole life he had wanted a place. To belong. To be part of the circle. This was not that. This was the opposite. This was living apart, forever. It was carrying a secret so heavy it could bend your back. It was watching life happen from the outside, never being able to step in and change its course. He was just a boy. He wanted to laugh, to run, to someday have a family of his own by a fire. If I say no? Quito asked, his voice small. Nalangu's face softened with infinite sadness. Then I will hold on until I can no longer. The blight will take the grasslands. The river may sour. The animals will leave. The whispering darkness will find its way in. And our people will scatter, starving, to lands that may not want them. All because an old man broke a rule for a boy, and the boy was afraid of the price. The words hung in the air. Quito thought of the children who had ignored him, the families who had given him only scraps. Was this his responsibility? To give up a normal life for them? Then he looked at Nalangu. Really looked. He saw the elder who had given him quiet company when no one else would. He saw the man who had used his most sacred power, knowing the cost, to save a lonely orphan under the hooves. He hadn't done it for the village. He had done it for KIT. Oh, this wasn't about the village that feared him now. It was about the one person who had shown him true kindness. It was about protecting the land that was Nalangu's whole life. It was about honoring that sacrifice. A strange calm settled over him. The fear was still there, buzzing in his chest. But underneath it, a decision was forming, solid and clear. He looked up, meeting Nalangu's weary eyes. What will happen to you? He asked. If I take it? A faint, peaceful smile touched the old man's lips. I will be free. My watch will be over. I will rest under the great baobab, and my story will become part of the roots. Quito took a deep, shuddering breath. He thought of the dying grass, the hungry whisper in the dark, the fading light in his only friend's eyes. He was an orphan with nothing to lose, and yet, in this moment, he had everything to give. He nodded, once. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was a simple, heavy movement. I will take it, he said. I will be the guardian. The journey to the great baobab was made in the deepest part of the night, when even the insects were still. Nalangu leaned heavily on Quito, who was now walking with only a faint stiffness. They moved like two shadows through the silent village, past the huts where people slept, unaware of the quiet change that was coming to their world. The old man's breathing was labored, but his steps were sure, guided by a lifetime of knowing every stone and path. The great baobab stood alone in a wide clearing, a giant in the moonlight. Its massive silvery trunk looked like it held up the sky, and its branches, bare of leaves, spread out like the veins of the earth itself. It felt ancient and quiet and alive in a way that made Quito's heart beat with a slow, solemn rhythm. Nalangu led him to the base of the tree, where the roots rose from the soil like the knees of a sleeping giant. Here, he finally opened the worn leather pouch he always wore. He did not pour out a physical seed. Instead, he cupped his hands together, and a soft, greenish-gold light began to glow between his palms. It was a warm light, like the first sun of the morning, and it pulsed gently in time with Quito's own heartbeat. The hands must be empty to hold this, Nalangu whispered. Empty of hate, empty of greed. Your heart must be a clean vessel. Think of the reason you are here, not for power, but for the promise. Quito thought of the buffalo bearing down. He thought of his own body flying through the air to cover the old man. He thought of the quiet afternoons in the shade. He let all other thoughts go, the fear, the loneliness, the worry about what came next. He thought only of protection, and of kindness returned. He held out his own hands. Nalangu leaned forward and gently blew into his cupped palms. The glowing light, like a cloud of living embers, floated from the elder's hands into Quito's. The moment it touched his skin, a shock went through him. It was not pain. It was everything. It was the taste of the first rain on dry earth. It was the feeling of grass growing, of roots digging deep, of 1,000 heartbeats, tiny mice, sleeping birds, prowling leopards, all thrumming at once. He felt the vast, slow dream of the baobab tree. He felt the sickness, the blight, like a cold, sad spot on the land, and he felt the strong, healthy pulse of the distant hills. He was connected to all of it, a single note in a vast, humming song of life. The feeling was so huge it was terrifying, and so beautiful it brought tears to his eyes. As the light faded from his hands and seeped into him, becoming a warm, humming presence in his chest. He saw Nalangu change. The elder straightened. The lines of pain and endless tiredness on his face seemed to soften, not into youth, but into peace. A deep, settled calm washed over his features. He looked like a man who has put down a burden he has carried for 100 years. Nalangu reached out and placed a hand on Quito's head. His touch was light, a blessing. "The land is yours to watch over now, Storykeeper," he said, and his voice was clear and strong for the first time. "Listen to it. It will tell you what it needs." Then the old man sat down, his back against the great trunk of the baobab. He let out a long, slow sigh of contentment, like a traveler finally coming home. He closed his eyes, and a small, serene smile stayed on his lips. Quito sat beside him, watching, feeling the immense new awareness inside him. He felt the moment Nalangu's own small, bright flame of life gently went out, merging back into the great, warm pulse of the world he had guarded for so long. It was not a sad feeling in the song. It was a completion. Quito sat there until the sky turned from black to deep blue, then to pale gray. He felt the blight in the land, but now he also felt the remedy. It was not a magic trick. It was encouragement. It was asking the healthy life around the edges to grow, to spread, to heal the wound. He focused on that feeling, pushing it gently out from his own heart, through the roots of the great tree, and into the soil. When the first ray of sun broke over the horizon, he stood up. He was different. His eyes saw more, not just shapes and colors, but the faint glow of life in every plant, every creature. The weight of solitude was there, a knowledge that he could never be just a boy in the village again. But there was also a purpose, solid and real as the earth beneath his feet. He walked back to the village as the people were beginning to wake. They saw him walking tall, no trace of a limp, and they stared. The suspicion was still in their eyes. But then, a child, the one who always chased the grass ball, pointed towards the river and shouted. People turned. Overnight, the creeping line of black, dead grass had stopped. At its very edge, where the blight had been strongest, tiny, brave shoots of fresh green were pushing up through the ash-colored soil. It was just a few blades, but it was a start. It was a change. They looked back at Quito, confusion replacing anger. He did not speak to them. He simply walked past them, towards Nalangu's empty hut. He was not their orphan anymore. He was something else. Inside the hut, he picked up Nalangu's ebony walking stick. It felt right in his hand. He would need to learn the old stories now, all of them, to understand the land he was bound to. He felt the seed's warmth in his chest, a quiet, living companion. He was the guardian. The boy who had saved a life was gone. In his place was the young man who would now watch over all life. His own story, his simple story of an orphan boy, had ended under the hooves of the buffalo. A new story, vast and deep as the roots of the great baobab, had just begun. And he would be its keeper.